Well, good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. Today was a big win, or seemed to be, for Republicans in the Congress. Democrats caved to their demands. The government is back open. Ed Henry will have details on that in just a minute. Also, there are new text messages tonight from the FBI with stunning revelations about the Hillary Clinton investigation. Even if you think you know a lot about it, stay tuned. Pretty remarkable. But first, for more than a year on this show, we've discussed our country's immigration policies. Pretty much every night we've asked supporters of open borders, how can you justify this? Do American citizens benefit from these policies or not? We still don't know. Finally, from MSNBC comes an answer. On her weekend show this Saturday, anchor Joy Reid interviewed a genealogist who had done historical research on my family. Apparently, one of my ancestors came to this country in 1860 from Switzerland. I didn't even know that until Reid's show aired because I have zero interest in the subject. That was more than 150 years ago. It is irrelevant to the decisions that I make as a father or a citizen or an employee of Fox News. It tells us precisely nothing about our modern immigration policy. America's economy has changed quite a bit since the Civil War. Yet, according to MSNBC, this fact is a conversation ender. A single 19th century Swiss relative means you are now required to support green cards for everyone who jumps the borders or overstays a visa in 2018. Boom! Case closed! As Reid's guest put it, people in genealogical glass houses shouldn't throw stones, meaning me. Well, as is so often the case, it's hard to know exactly whether this was meant as a legitimate point of debate or whether it was part of an elaborate parody. Monty Python does DACA. But there's absolutely no doubt about the sincerity of what came next. Here's Joy Reid's response. She wasn't joking at all. Watch.
Tucker's been one of the most sort of aggressive at putting forward what a lot of people have seen as a pretty blatantly white nationalist view of what immigration should be like.
So Joy Reid is accusing us of racism. Let's pause for a moment and savor the irony of that. Reid's entire public career has been built on race baiting. Try to watch her show for 20 minutes and see for yourself. This is the woman who urged the Democratic Party to give up on white voters who voted for Obama and then Trump, saying their votes weren't worth fighting for. That was last August. In October, she suggested that White House Chief of Staff John Kelly was somehow a bigot because he grew up around Irish Catholics. After House Majority Whip Steve Scalise was shot and nearly killed by a progressive activist last summer, Reid openly wondered if we should hope for his recovery. Watch.
It's a delicate thing because, obviously everybody is wishing the congressman well and hoping that he recovers.
Sure.
But Steve Scalise has a history that we've all been forced to sort of ignore on race. He did come to leadership after some controversy over attending a white nationalist event, which he says he didn't know what it was. He also co-sponsored a bill to amend the Constitution to define marriages between a man and a woman. Because he is in jeopardy and everyone is pulling for him, are we required in a moral sense to put that aside at the moment?
So when Joy Reid accuses you of harboring racist thoughts, trust me, it's projection. But it's also a political tactic. Reid can't explain why this country so badly needs to import millions of additional poor people. Nobody on the left can explain that because there's no real answer. So they attempt to short-circuit the conversation with slurs. That's a shame. Immigration matters. It determines who lives in this country, who chooses our government, who shapes our future. It's hard to think of a public policy topic more central to everything. We've tried our best to discuss immigration reasonably and with civility. Most of the time we succeed, not all, but we try. We tried to make a rational case for what we think ought to be done. We'd like immigration policies that favor the American middle class over foreign countries, corporate elites, and lobbyists. We think that laws passed by our Congress ought to be respected and enforced, not mocked and ignored by our own leaders. We believe that America is an actual place, not just an abstract idea. It's a distinct country with its own history, language, tradition, values. Change, when it comes, ought to be thoughtful and incremental. We owe that to the people who already live here, people of all colors and backgrounds. We're suspicious of efforts to remake our society wholesale, especially just so a small group of tastemakers can feel virtuous or have cheaper nannies. Any change is hard. Demographic change especially is hard. Let's stop lying about that. It always hurts the weak and economically vulnerable first. Someone ought to be thinking about their interests too. Those are our views. And they're not extreme, and we know that because we've seen the polling on the subject. A huge number of Americans agree with what we just said. If you don't believe it, look up the views of African American voters on illegal immigration. They are not what Joy Reid, to put it mildly. They know what the cost has been. Those who disagree with any of this are always welcome here. This is the only show on television that books guests every night who have a different view. We look hard for the smartest and most articulate people we can find. You can listen to both sides on this show and you can make up your own mind. The organized left hates that. They no longer believe in debate. They believe in power, accumulating it, and most of all, in wielding it. Anyone who gets in their way gets shouted down, in this case, as a racist. That doesn't work anymore. What was once a devastating attack on a person's character is now just background noise. When everything is racist, from ice cream trucks to Dr. Seuss, nothing is. The term has been devalued by reckless overuse. And that's a shame because it still applies. There's still plenty of racism in America, maybe more now possibly than in generations. Americans are attacked openly for their race every day in print, on television, at public gatherings. People are punished for their race in hiring, in college admissions, in government and private contracting. The left supports all of this. It's central to their worldview. It's key to their political strategy, but it's totally wrong, and we plan to keep saying that. We still believe in what used to be the central premise of American liberalism. People ought to be judged on what they do, not on how they look, or who their parents were, or what their ancestors did. We don't believe in collective punishment or reward. We believe in the individual, and because we do, we think our immigration policy ought to be driven by what each individual can add to America. Nobody has the right to be admitted by lottery, or because they happen to be related to someone who's already here, or because they snuck in and it's too politically difficult to make them leave. That's what we think. Disagree with it? You are always welcome on this show. Mark Steyn is an author and columnist and the subject of many attacks online since his last appearance on the show, including, I think, on Joy Reid's program over the weekend. So we thought he'd invite him back and ask him for a response. How you doing, Mark?
Hey, I'm doing great, Tucker. Fascinated to hear about your great-grandfather from Switzerland in 1860. It's interesting to me that actually one of the things I like about you, Tucker, one of the few things is that you don't, when you discuss immigration, you don't go on about your great-grandfather. And it's interesting to me that because most people say, oh well, you know, people attack immigration. My great-grandmother got off the boat at Ellis Island in 1979. And 6 weeks later, she was the third orphan on the right in the Broadway production of Annie, singing "The Sun Will Come Out Tomorrow," and that's the American dream right there. They either do that, or they say, well, you know, I've got a Venezuelan pool boy, and he's the hardest working chap I know. So what's the problem with immigration? And in fact, you're the only one, because you're one of the few people who doesn't discuss it in terms of your great-grandfather. MSNBC has hired somebody to find out who your great-grandfather is and hang him round your neck. And as you pointed out, this is completely preposterous. There were lots of things we needed in 1860. Your great-grandfather, buggy whips, the Transcontinental Railroad, oxen, and oddly enough, 160 years later, we need less of all those things, apparently, except immigration. This is absurd.
Well, what's so interesting is how there's no real response other than to the personal. I mean, I know the temptation when you get upset about something to try and hang it on a person's personal hang-ups or his personality or his background or whatever, but you try to pull back and ask what principles are at stake here and ask obvious questions like, how does this help the Americans already here? I cannot get, I'm not just saying this, every night, I cannot get a real answer to that from anybody, ever. Not one.
No. Well, it is this resistance to talking about it in public policy. I had something similar after I was on your show last week. There's all these people who are suddenly going online and pointing out that I'm Canadian. It was the first I'd heard of it. I was stunned. Who knew? Apparently, the MSNBC genealogist had been in touch with the Vital Statistics Office in the Dominion of Canada. I was stunned. The fact is, it's public policy. I go to Rosengård in Sweden, and what I see there, I think, is a tragedy for the Swedes, who'll be an ethnic minority in their own country by mid-century. I go to Molenbeek in my mother's country of Belgium, and I think that's a tragedy. And actually, just to save the MSNBC House genealogist a bit of time, I happen to be an Irish-Belgian Canadian, which is one of the smaller parades down Main Street every year. But in the scheme of things, there is very little difference between Irish Catholics and Irish Protestants. Yet that has caused tragic bloodshed in our lifetime. There is very little difference in the scheme of things between Francophone Quebecers, a half hour north of me here in northern New England, and Anglophone Canadians. Yet 20 years ago, in the 1990s, a majority of Francophone Quebecers voted that they didn't want to be part of the same country as Canadians. And so putting aside race, small group differences can have huge consequences. And that's why I come back to a point I make a lot on your show, Tucker, that when you're talking about public policy, it's best to err on the side of prudence. And if we can't, and the Democrats all the time are about how, as we've just established with Joy Reid, it's not that you can't talk about this subject, it's just that as Joy sees it, only certain people can talk. So she can say the Democrats should give up on white rural voters and just focus on black voters. Kirsten Powers, Democrat, can say on election night 2012 that this is about the browning of America. Bob Beckel on election night can talk, another Democrat can talk about the white vote. So what Joy and co are saying is that basically they can talk about it incessantly, but just that nobody else can.
Yeah, I'd rather not play by those rules, and we're not going to. And neither are you, which is why we love you. Mark Stein, thank you.
And it's not in good faith, Tucker, which is what your show, in fairness, is.
Well, thanks. I appreciate that. Good to see you. Well, nationally, Democrats call anyone who disagrees with their immigration views a bigot. In California, they've gone way beyond that. California Attorney General Javier Becerra is threatening employers with prosecution if they collaborate with their own federal government in enforcing immigration law. Travis Allen is caught right in the middle of this. He's a California state assemblyman. Peter Kirsanow is a lawyer and serves on the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights and has spent a lot of time thinking about the question of immigration. They both join us tonight. Thanks a lot for coming on, both of you.
Thanks, Tucker.
So, Mr. Allen, to you first. Are we overstating it, or does it seem like one of those moments where the union begins to fall apart when your Attorney General says he's going to prosecute Californians for obeying federal law? That seems a big deal to me.
This is a very big deal. I mean, this goes far beyond just legislators trying to make California a sanctuary state. Now you're looking at the Attorney General literally with criminally trying to obstruct justice. He is instructing California business owners that if you try to comply with federal immigration law, you will be prosecuted under state law. He's crossed the line. This is now a criminal offense. Department of Justice needs to come. Sessions and Trump need to come to California, literally arrest, indict Javier Becerra for breaking federal law.
Seems like maybe a bigger deal than a lot of other things we're worried about in Washington. Mr. Kirsanow, you got to kind of wonder who is being served by these policies. Harvard has kind of an amazing new study out on attitudes toward immigration, and it shows that African-American voters are among the most conservative on this. 85% of black voters polled by Harvard said you should not be allowed to come to the United States unless you are bringing skills or money with you. That's considered a fringe view in Washington. Why is this not better known? These views?
It's not better known because there's a political imperative in making sure that this kind of information has not gotten out there. If you take a look at all of the studies that show who is affected most in an adverse way by illegal immigration, without question and by far it's black Americans, particularly black males. 40% of the 18-point decline in black employment levels is due to illegal immigration. We're talking, if you do the math, of over 1 million people who don't have jobs because of illegal immigration and the competition that comes from that. But it goes beyond simply the economic aspect of this, which is devastating. We're talking about family formation issues, incarceration issues. Yes. But to take California, for example, it's very difficult to get this kind of data because public officials guard this data more tenaciously than nuclear launch codes. But trying to get crime data on illegal immigrants, and we've done it. We've spent a copious amount of time laboriously disaggregating information. There's at least 2,430 illegal aliens in California prisons today due to murder. John Lott has done a study showing that illegal aliens, and especially DACA-age illegal aliens, are 245% more likely to commit all manner of crimes than our lawful residents. That kind of statistic we've looked at the Civil Rights Commission. My assistant and I and special counsel have looked at this kind of information and have seen that on average, we're talking about the states where we can find this data, mainly the bigger states like New York, Florida, Texas, Arizona, and California. We're looking at least 60% more likely, if you're an illegal immigrant, to have committed a crime of any nature, but many of those crimes are of the most horrific nature, than are lawful residents. This visits horrific implications upon those vulnerable communities. One of those communities is the black community.
Well, and you'd think we would have a debate about it. Travis Allen, are these figures discussed at all in the state of California by your media there?
You know, unfortunately, they are not. You know, they're entirely overlooked, and everyone is trying to make this about immigration, when what we're really talking about is illegal immigration. And, you know, in California, we've got the sanctuary state, so this is not even people that have come here illegally. This is people who have come here illegally and then are committing crimes while they're here, and then they're being paid for and defended with taxpayer dollars. And then now, on top of this, I mean, really, as if that wasn't enough, now Javier Becerra is threatening every California business owner. Again, you know, if you try to comply with federal law, if you comply with federal authorities doing their constitutional duty, he is going to prosecute you under California law. We're talking criminal prosecution, fines of $10,000 or potentially even more. And this is how far it's gone in California.
It's grotesque. If you obey your own country's law.
Yeah.
That's unbelievable. Gentlemen, thank you both.
So, yeah, thank you.
I appreciate it. Over the weekend, Senator Lindsey Graham announced the White House advisor Stephen Miller is an extremist on immigration. It is Miller's fault, Graham says, that the Senate can't work out a deal on DACA, even though, of course, Graham is in the U.S. Senate and Stephen Miller is not. Graham didn't explain how Miller was wrong on immigration, no details at all. He just said he was extreme and should therefore shut up. We spoke to Stephen Miller, and he's perfectly willing to come on this show and debate Senator Graham directly live about their differences on immigration. That would be a fascinating and edifying conversation. We'd all benefit from that, but Graham has refused. Why? The truth is that Lindsey Graham is the one with an extreme position on immigration. Nothing personal, but the numbers show it. A new Harvard-Harris poll conducted last week showed that 81% of Americans want immigration reduced below current levels. Large majorities want skill-based immigration and an end to the diversity lottery and a more secure border. Graham is on the wrong side of the public on every one of those issues. In other words, he is literally an extremist. And he's still welcome on this show anytime to explain himself. That invitation stands as it always has. The government shutdown over DACA lasted fewer than 3 days. Congress finally worked out a deal to fund the government for a couple more weeks. Fox chief national correspondent Ed Henry has all the details on what just happened. Ed.
Tucker, we can report two key facts, not opinions. One, Democrats caved. Secondly, in exchange for that, they got very little. Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer today tried to basically spin this and blame it on President Trump in terms of the shutdown. But there's a reason why the hashtag Schumer shutdown on social media today became the hashtag Schumer surrender. He himself voted to reopen the government after moderate Democrats up for re-election this year abandoned Schumer and broke with the left. That did not stop Democrats like Hillary Clinton fundraiser Steve Elmendorf from tweeting, quote, Dems have pocketed a big win on funding CHIP and have a real process to pass a DACA bill in 3 weeks. Everyone should focus on making that successful. The problem is the president and Republican leaders had already given them CHIP funding, that's child health insurance, for 6 years last Friday. And Schumer and many other Democrats voted against that. That led to the shutdown. As for DACA, Democrats are basically going to get a vote in the Senate in the next few weeks, but there's no guarantee that the version that passes the House is going to get through conservatives in the House. So they got very little, Tucker.
Interesting. Not expected. Ed Henry, thanks very much for that.
Good to see you, buddy.
New released text messages indicate that top FBI officials knew that Hillary Clinton would be exonerated before she was even interviewed. And that looks a lot like corruption. Details next. The FBI's handling of the Hillary Clinton email investigation is increasingly looking corrupt. Hate to say that, but that's what the evidence is showing us. Newly released text messages sent between agents Peter Strzok and Lisa Page, who were dating one another, suggested the Bureau felt, quote, pressure to wrap up that investigation and exonerate Hillary Clinton even before they had interviewed her. We could learn more, but the FBI says it has lost thousands of messages, text messages, sent between Strzok and Page. Republican Senator Ron Johnson represents Wisconsin. He chairs the Homeland Security Committee. He's one of the reasons we know any of this in the first place, and he joins us tonight. Senator, thanks for coming on.
Hello, Tucker.
So you remember, of course, when the Attorney General Loretta Lynch said that she would accept whatever the FBI's recommendation was in the Hillary Clinton investigation. Now it looks from these texts that she'd already decided to exonerate Hillary Clinton.
Well, she already knew that Comey was going to recommend exoneration.
So how is that? I mean, that strikes me as the definition of corruption. Am I missing something?
No, not at all. You know, what's making a lot of news is the 5 months of missing text messages,
Yes.
which we'll continue to investigate ourselves. But I mean, the fact that Loretta Lynch knew before she made the big announcement that, oh, you know, because of potential conflict of interest meeting Bill Clinton, I'm going to let James Comey decide that, you know, combined with all the editing of that memo that was the production of that thing began 2 months before they actually interviewed Secretary Clinton. That's a little bit of a problem. No, there's so many things that indicate a deep-seated corruption at the highest levels of the FBI. Now, again, I got to say that the vast majority of FBI folks are high integrity, and they're risking their lives to keep us safe.
Sure.
But at the upper level, what we're starting to uncover is just a level of corruption that needs further investigation.
So Lisa Page, FBI employee, says Loretta Lynch knows no charges will be brought against Hillary Clinton. Wouldn't it be worth speaking to former Agent Page, or I guess Agent Page? I believe she still works.
I think at the right point in time, we want to make sure we're going to try and recover those 5 months worth of email texts, because that's in a pretty crucial time between December of 2016 and May. Awful lot was going down in terms of the FBI investigation under the current administration.
So they're just lost somehow. They're blaming the technology company. How often are people's tax liens just lost by the government?
I mean,
like,
tax?
No, if I owe the government money, they don't just sort of lose the paperwork for that, but somehow they lost this. I mean, I'm skeptical.
If we lose them, we're in heap big trouble.
Exactly.
Okay, we better get a good tax attorney or just a good attorney in some way, shape, or form. They're not very forgiving if we lose evidence. When they lose it, it's just kind of, hey, we've had a little technology blip here. Don't worry about it. Well, we're going to worry about it. We're going to keep digging.
So the idea is that they had these texts in their possession and then they lost them somehow.
Well, they were supposed to be preserved. They're saying they didn't preserve them. But the good news is, let's face it, in today's technology, texts go up to some server, some cloud. They're probably stored somewhere, which is why we'll probably be releasing, or we're going to be certainly looking at preservation record letters to some of these technology companies.
Would it be possible to subpoena the cell phones on which they were written?
Probably don't have to do that yet. Right now, we're just going to make sure they preserve the evidence, and then we'll ask for the information.
And just in the sake,
hopefully, I won't have to subpoena it.
Yeah, hopefully you won't. In the sake of fairness, has the former Attorney General Lynch responded to this in any way?
No, she has not responded. It'd be really interesting to see what she has to say. It'd be interesting to see what Director Comey has to say as well, because I think he testified somewhat variance to what these texts reveal as well.
Amazing. Senator, thank you very much for this.
Have a good night.
Depressing story. The second annual Women's March took place over the weekend. It was supposed to promote women's rights. Of course, it degenerated into racial attacks on camera. That story's next. Opportunity for the left to push a racial and pretty radical agenda. Repeatedly, progressive used the platform offered by the march to denounce a whole group of women as a race. Watch.
So white women, listen up. We've got to do better. We've got to do better. It is not up to women of color to save this country from itself. That's on all of us.
So many of you in this audience have had a lifetime of activism. A lot of us, particularly us white women, have a lot of catching up to do. Hold other white folks accountable, especially those you're closest to.
Rachel Campos-Duffy's a Fox contributor. She joins us tonight. What is that, Rachel? I can't stand it when people talk like that in public. I mean, that actually is the definition of divisive, I think. Why people didn't used to talk like that. What are they doing?
Well, I think for the leaders of this march, the march is not about women. It's about politics. It's about power.
Yeah.
In the case of Cecile Richards, it's about money. And the message to women is, look, we've got all these black and brown people voting the way we want. Now you guys get in line too, which to me strikes me as the opposite of a pro-feminist, pro-woman message.
Well, it definitely does. But why? I mean, look, I'm trying to be open-minded. I certainly support the right of people who disagree politically to march and to say what they think. I mean, I'm not a liberal, so I am actually for free speech. But it does. There is a kind of brittle tone to this that doesn't seem constructive. It seems just angry. What is that about?
Well, and it's interesting to contrast. You talk about the anger, the Right to Life March. I've been to both of these marches. In fact, I covered the March for Women in New York City for Fox and Friends this past weekend. So the marchers were angrier than the marchers at Right to Life March. But I would say, you know, when I went into the crowd, I don't think the leadership is on the same page as the people in the crowd. The leadership have a very clear idea of what they want. The people in the crowd were sort of there for lots of different reasons, mainly, of course, that they were very angry at Trump. It was an anti-Trump march. But they had all these other issues that they were concerned about. Interestingly, I did ask many of the marchers what they thought about pro-life women and if pro-life women would be welcomed at the march. And unanimously, every one of the marchers said yes, that pro-life women would be welcomed at the march, which is completely out of line with where the leadership was last year when they kicked out New Wave Feminist group, a group that was against Trump but was decidedly pro-life. They weren't allowed to participate. And the reason is, I think somebody like Cecile Richards from Planned Parenthood, they see their power waning because technology has really sort of made no one question the humanity of the fetus. And so she's losing power. And so she's sort of globbed onto this Women's March, which is sort of, you know, anti-Trump, plus Me Too, plus a bunch of other issues all together. And so she's using the march to unite or sort of attach herself to a woman's march. And of course, what it says is if you disagree with them on any, you know, on abortion, for example, or even the resistance, you're not part of the sisterhood, you're against women, which is the tactic they've used with Hispanics like me who are conservative. They say, you know what, if you don't agree with us, you're a coconut, you're brown on the outside, you're white on the inside. Or I've been getting a lot of Tia Toms, like Uncle Tom or Auntie Tom.
Oh, come on.
So that's just how they try and get you in line. They try and shame you.
Right. I mean, I think your analysis is really smart. I hadn't thought of it, but I think you're exactly right. Is as they feel like they're losing control of the conversation. It's like regimes. When they feel like they're losing control, they become repressive. And that's exactly, I think, what's going on.
Can I say one more thing, Tucker? You mentioned regime, which was interesting because a lot of the marchers talked about Donald Trump as if he was this autocratic dictator, and they talked about his administration as a regime, which struck me as quite funny because I feel like he spent the last year decentralizing government, decentralizing politics, giving power back to the people, which strikes me as the opposite of what a dictator would do. So it was very interesting. They also seemed
they don't even have their appointees in place. I mean, if anything, he's the opposite.
Right.
It's the least organized group I've seen. No,
and when I brought up to some of the women, and by the way, you can see the full tape from Fox and Friends online if you pull it up. But when I asked them about the economy and how well women are doing in the Trump economy, you know, unemployment among women is at an 18-year low. So many minorities are doing so much better under this economy. They seemed utterly uninterested. Some conceded it, but almost all said it was Obama's economy.
Right, of course, because the left doesn't care about economics
messaging
anymore.
for the right. And one last message, they are energized. So the conservative movement, the Republicans, need to watch out. There is an enthusiasm.
Yeah, well, that's obvious, and we may see it in the midterms. Rachel, thank you for that. Good to see you. Assisted suicide is now legal in 6 states, also D.C. But are these laws making dying easier or encouraging people to die earlier for the sake of cost savings? Talk about it with a supporter of the new laws next. Americans are being told that suicide is valid treatment for disease. 6 states, including California, have legalized assisted suicide. More states are considering it, and of course, many will pass it. Of course, patients can simply kill themselves rather than receive expensive medical care. Do we risk having the right to die become a duty to die? Are economic pressures going to play a role in this? Amy Peikoff is a talk show host, liberal, very smart, though. She supports assisted suicide. She joins us tonight for a conversation about it. Amy, thanks for coming on.
Hi, thanks for having me back to discuss another important topic, Tucker.
Well, I think this is important, and here's my concern. Look, I don't want to make a case against assisted suicide. I personally am opposed to it, though I understand why people would be for it, and I hesitate even to get involved in that. I just want to make an obvious point, though, and I'm sure you've thought about this. Why wouldn't there be enormous economic pressure brought to bear on a system that spends a huge percentage of all expenditures in the last months of life pushing people to kill themselves? Why wouldn't that happen?
There are always going to be economic pressures in life. That's kind of the nature of life. But in terms of this idea of a duty to die culture arising simply because of this law, I just don't think it could happen. I think there have to be a couple other factors at play, which I hope to get to. I mean, to me, the situation that you're concerned about, the one in which somebody would feel that they have a duty to die, maybe because of pressure from, you know, unscrupulous family members who want to hang on to money or whatever it is, that sort of scenario is to me like the scenario of the homeschool in California run by the Turpins, this horrific, disgusting, abusive so-called homeschool. And I would no more take a case like that as a reason to, you know, curtail the right to school your children at home than I would to deny the availability of humane treatment at end of life to human beings, the same sort of treatment that we give to our animals.
Okay, but wait, why wouldn't health insurers see what's obvious? They have a massive incentive to, and I'm not saying they're doing this now, but I believe they will. Why wouldn't they? To encourage people to get off of their insurance, stop costing all this money. If you have COPD, or you have, you know, some advanced cancer, it costs them a ton of money to keep you alive. Why wouldn't they exert pressure on you to kill yourself and save them untold millions? I just don't understand why that's going to happen.
But first of all, you have to have safeguards in any law like this, right? So you're going to have to make sure that the person's making the decision voluntarily. It's not due to pressure from other people, that it's not due to a depression, right, where it's just depression talking, or whether, you also have to check and make sure that they have a real reason that they would want to die, that a rational person would say, given the suffering that I have before me, that's all I have, that I would want to do this. But let me tell you what I think is at play in terms of potentially creating a duty to die culture here. I think there's two things. One of them is the way that medicine's going right now. We have a large segment of our market is socialized already, socialized medicine, and I know you don't like socialized medicine. And in addition to that, there are other perverse incentives that are created because of government interference in the medical industry. It makes medicine more expensive, so it makes the economic pressures more likely. The second thing is the thing that has, I think, given rise to socialized medicine, and it's the place where you and I probably disagree. It's the altruist ethics in our culture. In our culture, it is almost universally upheld to be moral to sacrifice your interests to the interests of other people, to act out of duty.
Exactly.
And so if you see that you're going to be able to do your duty and sacrifice for, say, your family members and cost less money, or cost less money for society at large because of socialized medicine or whatever, by choosing to die earlier, then you might feel pressured into it. But the answer then is to reject socialized medicine and to reject the altruist morality.
Because you come on, we're supposed to debate, and you make my case more crisply and in a more compelling way than I managed to. I think we're just going to clip the last minute and a half of you talking, and I should scare the crap out of anybody who's for physician-assisted suicide, because that's going to happen. You're right. We're not changing socialized medicine, and we're not changing human nature. We're going to get pressured to die.
No, I think we are going to change socialized medicine. We are going to change human nature. And the answer to the fact that those controls are creating perverse incentives is not to take freedom away from people, Tucker. Freedom is messy. But I don't think we should have a duty to die, and we shouldn't have a duty to live, particularly if living
have the freedom to kill themselves, and many do, sadly, in increasing numbers. The question is whether you want the system to play a role in that. Do you want doctors and health insurers to be staying on the sidelines, nodding you on as you do it? No.
No rational doctor would want to help a patient end his or her life unless those safeguards that I talked about were there, right?
Okay, we'll see. I'm sorry, we're out of time. That was interesting as always with you. Come back, Amy. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Someone just called for Mike Rowe to be booted off television for his political views. Does he have them? We'll ask him next. People, and yet not everyone is appreciative. Rowe is narrating a new season of the Discovery Channel's How the Universe Works. One viewer says he's not fit for the job. Why? Well, on Facebook, that viewer argued that Rowe is, quote, anti-education, science-doubting, ultra-right-wing conservative, and ought to be replaced by either a scientist or, maybe better, an actor. What's Mike Rowe's response to that? Well, he joins us in studio with that response. Hey, Mike, anti-science, huh?
If only we could get an actor.
Yeah, just someone kind of write down, someone with authority.
Sure.
Someone who pretends for a living.
Yeah.
So what was this about? Who is this person, by the way?
I think her name was Rebecca, and she was one of the legions of Facebookers who just kind of cruise around and had an axe to grind. And you know how it works. Anybody can say anything to anybody nowadays. And I generally welcome criticism. In fact, I kind of crave it. It's fun to mix it up. But this woman actually really got my attention because she copied everybody, tagged everybody, including my bosses at the production company, my bosses at the network. And so she essentially said that because she had an opinion of what my opinions might be on certain things, those opinions of her opinion regarding my opinion might not necessarily be completely congruent with the opinions of scientists that may or may not weigh in on very specific topics regarding the workings of the universe. So, I'm the narrator of this show. I don't improvise. I walk in, I sit down, and I talk in a crisp, well-modulated baritone and tell you about supernovas and quasars and things like that. I mind my own business. I sip my tea in a climate-controlled booth. I don't make trouble with anybody. And
you're not sneaking any political propaganda in between the scripts.
It's the opposite of that. I take all opinion, nuance, and anything that could be remotely concerned with the real attitude out of my voice and just read somebody else's.
But you always do that. That's why this story was so interesting and revealing, I thought. I've watched you carefully for, I don't know, more than 15 years probably.
That's not weird at all.
Well, I've never, and I'm good at sniffing it out, I've never detected a political statement of any kind from you at all. You play it straighter than anyone I've ever seen.
Thanks.
That itself is now a political statement, it seems like.
That's what's fascinating about it. It's not what you say, it's what you don't. And I'm not sure how we measure or quantify it, but we do. And there's a mysterious algorithm floating around social media that for a long time, if you said the wrong thing, you heard about it quickly. Now, if you don't say the right thing, you hear about it instantaneously. And it makes the conversation about the whole topic nothing short of fascinating. In fact, I thought of you when I was responding to her, which I did in about 1,200 words. I was on a plane, trapped, and had some time on my hands. And, I share your view about social media. I think there's a lot to be concerned about with regard to the way it's used. And I think one day I'll be back here talking to you about the parallels between the Second Amendment and the First Amendment vis-a-vis social media and gun control. I think what I mean to say is it's a tool. And how you use social media today is a major conversation point, and how this woman used it and how I respond to it and what I try to use it for with the show I'm working on and how other people choose to use it. I think it's going to be the issue of our times.
But you don't care, for whatever reason, to share your political views, assuming you even have any. I don't even know if you have any.
I do.
But you don't share them.
No.
You're rigorous about not sharing them. How long can you keep that up?
Well, I think indefinitely, but there's a difference between hiding and not sharing.
People, and yet not everyone is appreciative. Rowe is narrating a new season of the Discovery Channel's How the Universe Works. One viewer says he's not fit for the job. Why? Well, on Facebook, that viewer argued that Rowe is, quote, anti-education, science-doubting, ultra-right-wing conservative, and ought to be replaced by either a scientist or, maybe better, an actor. What's Mike Rowe's response to that? Well, he joins us in studio with that response. Hey, Mike, anti-science, huh?
If only we could get an actor.
Yeah, just someone kind of write down, someone with authority.
Sure.
Someone who pretends for a living.
Yeah.
So what was this about? Who is this person, by the way?
I think her name was Rebecca, and she was one of the legions of Facebookers who just kind of cruise around and had an axe to grind. And you know how it works. Anybody can say anything to anybody nowadays. And I generally welcome criticism. In fact, I kind of crave it. It's fun to mix it up. But this woman actually really got my attention because she she copied everybody, tagged everybody, including my bosses at the production company, my bosses at the network. And so she essentially said that because she had an opinion of what my opinions might be on certain things, those opinions of her opinion regarding my opinion might not necessarily be completely congruent with the opinions of scientists that may or may not weigh in on very specific topics regarding the workings of the universe. So, you know, I'm the narrator of this show. I don't improvise. I walk in, I sit down, and I talk in a crisp, well-modulated baritone and tell you about supernovas and quasars and things like that. I mind my own business. I sip my tea in a climate-controlled booth. I don't make trouble with anybody. And
you're not sneaking any political propaganda in between the scripts.
It's the opposite of that. I take all opinion, nuance, and anything that could be remotely concerned with the real attitude out of my voice and just read somebody else's.
But you always do that. That's why this story was so interesting and revealing, I thought. I've watched you carefully for, I don't know, more than 15 years probably.
That's not weird at all.
Well, I've never, and I'm good at sniffing it out, I've never detected a political statement of any kind from you at all. You play it straighter than anyone I've ever seen.
Thanks.
That itself is now a political statement, it seems like.
That's what's fascinating about it. It's not what you say, it's what you don't. And I'm not sure how we measure or quantify it, but we do. And there's a mysterious algorithm floating around social media that for a long time, if you said the wrong thing, you heard about it quickly. Now, if you don't say the right thing, you hear about it instantaneously. And it makes the conversation about the whole topic nothing short of fascinating. In fact, I thought of you when I was responding to her, which I did in about 1,200 words. I was on a plane, trapped, and had some time on my hands. And, you know, I share your view about social media. I think there's a lot to be concerned about with regard to the way it's used. And I think one day I'll be back here talking to you about the parallels between the Second Amendment and the First Amendment vis-a-vis social media and gun control. I think what I mean to say is it's a tool. And how you use social media today is a major conversation point, and how this woman used it and how I respond to it and what I try to use it for with the show I'm working on and how other people choose to use it. I think it's going to be the issue of our times.
But you don't care, for whatever reason, to share your political views, assuming you even have any. I don't even know if you have any.
I do.
But you don't share them.
No.
You're rigorous about not sharing them. How long can you keep that up?
Well, I mean, I think indefinitely, but there's a difference between hiding and not sharing.